This happened about a year ago. From 2013 to 2015, I worked night shift security at an RV resort. I was on my way to work one night when my front driver's side tire blew out on a long, narrow dirt road. It was around 10:30 p.m., so it was pretty dark. I live in a very secluded area in upstate Florida, and this road was not near any neighborhoods and had only a few street lights. My shift started at 11, so I called the manager and told her that I might be a little late because I had to change the tire. After I got that squared away, I pulled out my car jack and started to position it underneath my Ranger. I was about to start cranking away when I saw the dim glow of some golf cart headlights approaching me from down the street in the direction I had just come from. I was thinking that it was probably a local, wondering what was going on, and maybe they would be nice enough to give me a hand. The golf cart stopped behind my truck. I stood up from where I was crouching and said, "Hey there, one of my tires just blew out. You wouldn't mind giving me a hand, would you? I'm kinda running late for work." The person in the golf cart did not respond, and then I heard them getting out of the golf cart. The person came within the headlights of their own golf cart. The light was dim, so it was kind of hard to see, but he looked like a middle-aged man with no shirt on, so I could clearly see his beer gut. He also had hairy legs, and I could see that something was dangling under his massive stomach. Turns out, he was completely naked. That's something I could have lived my entire life without seeing. The man seemed to be holding something in his hands. I only caught a quick look at the object. All dick jokes aside, the thing that this guy was holding looked like a machete. The man didn't say a word as he started to slowly walk towards me. I quickly jumped back in my truck, started it up, and noped the fuck out of there. I didn't have time to grab my car jack, so I just left it behind. My truck was lopsided from the deflated tire, and it awkwardly accelerated forward. I could see my interior mirror that the headlights of the golf cart were close behind me. Despite my truck having a flat tire, it was still going a decent speed, and so was the golf cart that was tailing me. So in a split-second decision, I slammed the brakes of my Ranger, and not even a second later I heard and felt the golf cart smash into my rear end. I rolled down my window and shouted, "Fuck you, creep!" and sped off. I managed to get to work on time. Fucked up my rim pretty bad though. I explained everything to the manager, and the cops were called. They searched the road but found no signs of the guy or his golf cart. But they did find my car jack, which was returned to me. Other than a few minor dents, the back of my truck didn't look bad at all. I'm sure that golf cart had it 10 times worse. He had to be going full speed when he crashed into me, and I'm surprised he was able to drive it away after that. I've come to the conclusion that this weirdo was on a serious meth high, because that area has that kind of reputation. I no longer own that truck or work at that site anymore. So, creepy bare-ass overweight machete-wielding psychopath, for the love of God, put on some fucking pants.
When I was 18, I worked at a local coffee shop in my hometown, and I often worked there picking up shifts and closing 6 nights a week. I had lots of regulars and lots of randoms, but other than maybe a few awkward orders, I never really had a problem with the customer being inappropriate or out of hand. This night was already really stressful for me because it was Halloween, and I was a little bummed to be closing when my friends were out and about. I had some plans to go with friends to a house that my friends had rented right down the street after work, with some pastries and Red Bull, so I didn't really mind too much. It was about 9:45, and I was already ready to close right at 10. It had been dead since about 8, and all I had to do was a final register count. Everything was clean, and I was reading a book to pass time, trying not to watch the clock. Our counter, by the way, is like a bar counter. Long, with the register near the door at the closed end, and with one far end open for us to go in and out of, right near the door to our back room. A man walked in the front door, who looked to be about his mid-20s. He was black and had on a big hoodie, and was wearing sweatpants that sagged down, so I could see the waistbands of 2 different pairs of gym shorts underneath. I'm a young white female, but I have no fear of people and I'm not racist, so I didn't bat an eyelash when he walked in with one hand in his hoodie pocket, and the other in the pocket of one of the pairs of gym shorts. Men of all races wear clothes like that and carry themselves that way, at least where I live, so with no concern, I greeted him and asked him how he was, and what he was thinking of ordering. He took his time to respond, but wasn't looking at the menu or at our chalkboard with seasonal drink offers. He was looking at the front door. He took about a minute, then turned to me and asked my name. I often had both male and female customers ask this, so I just told him, and then asked again when he was looking to order. He began to ask me more questions about me and my job. He asked if I liked it. I responded, thinking maybe he wanted a job application, and gave him a very short version of how I felt. It was almost 9:50 at this time, and I kept checking my phone, thinking that I just wanted to make his drink so I could clean up again and meet my friends. He nodded, saying he thought I liked my job, which I thought was strange, but again, I didn't think about it. I agreed again. He then started to ask about the shifts I worked. I figured he had sympathy that it was Halloween, and I gave him a vague answer. He then asked why I didn't work on Thursdays. My heart jumped. I didn't see that one coming from a mile away. I struggled to respond, and he continued, and asked if Sunday mornings were better than Wednesday nights. At this point, I broke into nervous laughter and smiles, asking him if he was looking to work for the coffee shop, and that we needed the help. He'd stopped smiling at this point, and his hand in the hoodie pocket made an abrupt move to the very inside pair of gym shorts, basically so that he would be grabbing himself. He didn't quite reach in all the way, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I asked him to order or leave, as the end of our business day was almost there, and that I needed to clean and lock up. At this point, I grabbed my cell phone and kept it in my hand, thinking, how can I dial 911 and not have him begin to molest himself in front of me, or whatever he planned on doing? He began to sort of lean on the counter and ask me questions. He asked me where I lived, did I have a boyfriend, what were my plans for that night. I was trying hard not to cry, and tried my best to lie through more vague answers, hoping he would just go away if I didn't freak out. He began to move away from the register at this point, still leaning on the counter, hands in his pants, towards the open end of the bar. I began to back far towards the front door as possible, but that end had no opening, and was so high. I couldn't jump it without considerable effort, and climbing over an espresso machine. The only other exit I could think of was our narrow drive-through window. Clutching my phone, I asked him what he wanted. For some reason, he stopped. He stood up and looked toward the front door, then turned to look at the clock behind him. I took the chance to start running a text message to my friend, saying, if I'm not at your place in 10 minutes, call the police. He caught me sending the text and asked me who I was texting. I told him it was my boyfriend, and his face became something that I will never forget. His eyes blazed, and he was still as a stone. He calmly told me to throw my cell phone across the floor, specifically telling me to try and throw it to the drive-thru. I had to really toss it, about 9 feet away. Afterwards, he began to scream, making his way again down the counter. He asked me how I could have a boyfriend, when he had been watching me at work for the last 2 months as often as possible, and had never seen a man drop me off or pick me up at work. He pointed to the side of the building that I parked on, and said he knew I parked my blue Toyota there earlier, and not to lie to him. I asked him to leave, beginning to cry. He began to describe my work shifts to a T. When I came in, when I left, how I smoked across the street on break. He told me that he knew that I only drank the Diet Coke that we sold, and that I always cranked up my music when I started my car. At that point, he pulled a small gun out of the gym shorts and waved it around as he said I was stupid to lie to him and that he knew it all. He was going between enraged and laughing, as if he couldn't believe that I didn't want to talk to him or that it was funny that I was scared. I offered him all the money in the register, and he just laughed again, like hysterically, and then again went still. He said, and I'll never forget this moment, "I'm not here for any money, Marina. I'm not here for a job. I think you know what I'm here for." I'm sobbing now, and it made him either frustrated or sympathetic, and he began to say how I just needed to calm down, and that he was just really excited to meet me. He still had one hand down near his dick, and began to fondle himself, holding the gun with the other hand, and about 3 feet away from the opening in the bar. I asked him again to just leave, and when he didn't move, I asked him what I did to him and why this was happening. He began to speak, saying that I was very pretty. He was continuing to talk when all of a sudden, my friend walked in the door with his friends in tow. There were 5 guys all together, and all in a metal band together, so they were a pretty distinct group of guys. The man had put his gun in his hoodie pocket so quickly that only 2 of my friends noticed it. He ran for the door, pushing past my friends, and disappeared into the night. I threw up as soon as he was gone, and 2 of my friends ran out after him, but didn't gain on him enough and didn't see where he went to. I quit my job the next day and called the police. There was never any follow-up, and I still wonder what the fuck did or didn't happen to me that night.
Halloween is my favorite holiday. Is, not was. Despite the events that unfolded one crisp Hallows Eve when I was about 16. At the time, I lived with my parents, younger brother, older stepbrother, and cousin in a big but old house that sat in a cul-de-sac close to Main Street. Behind it ran an alleyway flanked by apartments, and it had a huge yard that my basement bedroom looked out on. We lived in a small town. Crime seemed minimal in that area, and I'd made my way out that Halloween night to make the most of the best day of the year. It wasn't just what happened that night, though. It was, of course, what came after, and one small incident that came before. A few days before Halloween, my stepbrother and cousins arrived home to discover a pickup truck full of dudes taking photos of our house. Weird, but when we approached the men, they seemed friendly and complimented our Halloween setup. It was pretty great, that is true. The men sped off without incident and were quickly forgotten. My stepbrother and cousin re-entered the story Halloween night, the big event itself, at about 3 a.m. Both had been out drinking with their friends, and as such, both had left their respective vehicles and braved the icy walk home on their own. My cousin arrived home first, but he couldn't seem to get his key in the lock, so just sat on the porch bench and waited for my stepbrother to show up. He did about a half hour later. After having a bit of a laugh at my cousin for being an uncoordinated goober, he went to unlock the door himself, and no luck. So they bit the bullet and called my mom, waking her up to let them in. She was of course unimpressed to be opening the door for a pair of drunk idiots at this time of night, and didn't buy their story about the wonky lock. They insisted though, and to shut them up she finally relented and tried her key. She too could not get her key in the lock. Annoyed, tired, and now just confused, she wrote it off as a problem for tomorrow, and the 3 of them hit their respective hay. One other person arrived home that night. Me. Though I arrived much earlier than those 2, and was in bed by about midnight, I woke up close to 1 a.m. Still tired, all I could feel was anxiety, and I didn't know why. At first I tried to tell myself that I'd just gotten a bit too into the holiday spirit and had psyched myself out. But then I noticed a shadow. It was perfectly man-shaped and cast upon my window. I turned on my bedside lamp, blinked, and it was gone. It wasn't unusual, mind you, to see the shadows of people harmlessly walking through the alleyway, and I told myself that's all there was to it. Then there was what happened after. I came home from school the next day. My parents were there. So was a locksmith, and so were the police. My parents were there because, well, that's where they lived. The locksmith was there because my mother had called him as the confusion over the broken lock persisted. The cops were there because the locksmith and my parents had called them when the locksmith proceeded to pull out the tip of a knife out of our lock. I was relieved to see that's where the knife tip had ended up, though, as they discovered 2 of our window screens had been slashed, one on our garage and one on my bedroom window.
Alrighty, for those of you who might recognize my last story, you know that I no longer have my dog. She's with a family friend on 6 acres and is super happy. I've moved to a place closer to the city to be with my family. Some necessary info. I live in a 2-story townhouse that also has a basement with a garage. To get into my basement, you have to go through the 2 storm doors of my garage. My in-laws are currently living in my basement, which is a single room with steps that lead to the main floor. My main floor is my kitchen, laundry room, half bathroom, and the living room. And then I have 2 bedrooms and a full bathroom upstairs. When coming up the stairs, my 2-year-old son's is the first bedroom. My 10-month-old daughter still sleeps in a crib in my bedroom. Now, my house is full with pretty unique decor. I also have a big screen TV, a PS4, and an Xbox 360. My in-laws also have a 360 and an even bigger flat screen. About 3 or 4 months after we moved in here, I was in my son's room with him when I noticed one of our neighbors leaving my garage door area. I didn't see if she actually came out of it or not, but she was near it and walking away with a trash bag. I figured that she'd just gotten confused because she looked older and all of the houses look the exact same in the back and have no numbers back there. So I just shrugged it off. A few weeks later, I had just gotten my daughter to sleep. I was sleeping for maybe an hour when I slowly woke up, and it registered that I had heard a door creak. I looked up to see a man in my doorway, just staring at me. I jumped up screaming and ran to my daughter, while my husband jumped up, woken by my screams. He took a split second to register what was happening, and then charged at the guy. The guy, who appeared to be Milano and was dressed in black clothes and a checkered hoodie, quickly ran out. As he ran down the stairs, he said, "Sorry, I didn't know you were home." Here's the part that really gets us. He unlocked the front door to get out, which is on my first floor, meaning he had to have come through our basement where my father-in-law was asleep. He broke through 2 locked doors quietly enough to slip past a sleeping man. We figured it couldn't possibly be a case of mistaken housing because he had to walk past all of our fairly unique stuff to get to our room. What freaks me out the most is that he walked past my son's room first. I can't even bear to think what would have happened if he went to his room instead of walking past. We called the cops, but the guy was never found. We think he might have gone inside another house in the neighborhood to hide, because the police did rounds and couldn't find him. A week or so later, a cop came by and held up a picture, asking if it was him. I said maybe, because it had been dark in our room, and my husband was the only one who got a good look at his face. The cop informed me that he was wanted for aggravated assault, assault with a deadly weapon, and sexual assault.
When I was around 12 years old, I spent the afternoon at a friend's house who I knew from school. He lived in a neighborhood that I wasn't all that familiar with, so when we decided to take our bikes out for a ride, I simply followed him until we came to a large wooded area. It was in a valley that descended away from the roadside, and from what I could see became rather dense and overgrown quite quickly. Because of all the foliage, we decided to leave our bikes and go down on foot. We had been hiking for about 20 minutes when we realized that we could no longer see the spot that we had left our bikes and were surrounded on all sides by thick vegetation. Being boys, we thought this was absolutely fantastic and decided to carry on further into the valley. At some point we came across what looked like an abandoned campsite. There were some old cans lying around that looked like they had been used to boil water, an old ashy fire pit, and quite a lot of plastic sheeting. We had a look around but didn't really find anything interesting, so decided to carry on with our hike. Just as we were leaving, somebody called out to us from somewhere on the other side of the camp. A homeless man appeared, no doubt the camp dweller, and demanded to know what we were doing with his things. We explained that we didn't take anything and were just looking around, and he calmed down. We made a polite conversation for a few minutes, exchanged names, and gave a vague idea of where we had come from. At this point, we didn't feel like we were in any danger, and the homeless guy was actually quite friendly. We decided to get going though, and said our goodbyes, but he told us that we had to give him something before we went. We hadn't brought any food or water with us, and so didn't have anything to offer him, and he apparently took exception to this. He started yelling at us and demanded our shoes, which neither of us were willing to part with. We started to back away from him, and at the same time try and figure out which way we had come from when all of a sudden he pulled a knife out and started running towards us. I don't remember exactly which way we went or how far we had run, as I was terrified and full of adrenaline. I looked back a few times and realized that we were getting away from him, but he was still chasing us even though there was no cover from the trees at this point. We reached the side of the road where we had left our bikes, and fortunately had enough of a lead on him so that we could hop on and pedal for all we were worth. A couple of builders who were offloading materials up the road saw that we were panicked and stopped us to find out what was going on. We gave them a brief version of events, and they went back to see if he was still around, but apparently he was gone when they got there. My friend told his folks what happened that day, but I never heard anything more about it. As far as I know, he could still be living at his campsite. But I certainly wasn't going to go back and check.
Little bit of a background. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I just moved to a small town from a big city with my dad. We moved into our house in early October 2015, and we were having problems with the leaky shower in the bathroom adjacent to mine, so my dad called a plumber to come take a look. The plumber arrived around 8 a.m. the following day while I was getting ready for work in my bathroom. My dad let him in, so I hadn't gotten a good look at him. My dad then apparently goes down the street to gas up his car and then go to work, leaving the plumber to do his damn job in the bathroom. Now, my bathroom is just a toilet and vanity, with a door leading into a shared shower room that has another door leading into my dad's bathroom. So, while I was getting ready, there was only a door between the plumber and I guess he figured out that there was a lady in the house due to my hairdryer. Next thing I know, My bedroom door is opening and closing, and there is a very tall, very wide, very terrifying man with more legs than teeth locking my door from the inside behind him. He then walks 5 feet towards me and stops in front of my bathroom door. I freeze. He stands there staring at me for the longest 30 seconds of my life. He hits me with the widest, untoothiest grin and literally looks me up and down multiple times. I hear the front door open and close, not knowing then that my dad had forgotten his wallet, and the plumber pivots on one foot in a twirly motion and unlocks my door and walks out. My dad runs in my room asking if that guy had really just been there and goes to run after him, but the guy walked right to his truck and left without fixing our shower. So, my dad immediately calls the company we hire the plumber from and asks them to send someone else but not that guy, and he tries to explain what happened to the manager. The manager proceeds to tell my dad that it was our fault that the man locked himself in my room with me because I didn't lock him out of my room in the first place. Sorry, didn't know when I needed to lock myself away in order not to be creeped on by a supposed professional. Just terrifying to think of what would have happened if my dad didn't forget his wallet.
Spring 2014 is a slow season for my father's business. The weather is nice and the roads are clear, which means slow shifts at an auto shop. It was mid-April, around 4 p.m. The wind was pulling in a nice spring breeze when my dad, Bill, was walking along the side of his shop. It happened to overlook a small stream and running trail, which he enjoyed gazing at near the end of his shift. The side of his building ran along the top of a steep hill, which turned into the path. He heard a ruffling in the wind, and about halfway down the hill, he sees a big blue tarp. Being very proud of his business and its appearance, he started to climb down the hill. He was just about to grab for it, about 15 feet away, to toss it in the dump, when he saw a car pull into the lot. He turned around and went to help his customer. When 5:30 p.m. rolls around, he closes up and goes home, forgetting about the tarp. The next afternoon, Bill is sitting in his office when 3 policemen came in. They asked my father and co-workers a bunch of questions about any suspicious behavior they may have seen. Now, on a side note, my dad is extremely charismatic and friendly. He oftentimes talks people into sharing information with him that they really shouldn't. He looks like someone you can trust, and you can, and he seemed to always have the insider details about things like this. He used his humor to make people feel comfortable, which helped getting strangers to open up to him. So Bill and his coworker Hank are talking with a female police officer when she lets it slip that a body had been discovered just down the hill. "Oh shit, I was down there yesterday cleaning. I didn't see any body though," Bill said. "Around what time? Did you happen to see a large blue and white tarp while you were cleaning the area?" she asked intensely. Actually, yeah. I almost grabbed it yesterday, but I ended up getting distracted." She asked him more questions about what time, what he saw, etc., when he asked her if the body was found in the tarp. Yes it was. A woman jogging found it this morning around 10:30 a.m. My dad was floored. He was just there yesterday. After a few more questions, the police all head to the crime scene to finish the initial investigation. No one was allowed on the scene, and the police were asking that passerby not take any photos. Luckily for you guys, my dad took one from his office window. This is what it looked like. You can see near the top of the picture the running trail. Just in front of that is part of the creek that has dried up. There are the officers and such searching for whatever they were searching for. You can also see just left of the officer in black a teeny shade of blue. That would be the tarp. Flash forward a few days. The police went back to my father's shop. They noticed a security camera set up around the building, and they were hoping that they might catch something on tape. While transferring the data over, my dad started asking more questions about the murder. He learned it was a middle-aged man that had been stabbed to death. Not too much to go on, as it seemed. Hey, there's a couple of meth heads that live in that shack behind our shop. It's connected to that bar? Bill started talking about his own predictions for the whodunit scenarios. He continued. Yeah, we have a lot of problems with them. Stealing scrap metal from the back, letting their dogs run wild. Even had them threaten to shoot me once when I was spraying their dogs with water to quit the barking. You should check them out. The officer nodded, gathered the rest of his things, and left. Hey, Hank, let's go down there. See if we can find anything cool. My father whispered to his coworker. All right. I guess it couldn't do any harm. All right. I guess it couldn't do any harm. Hank replied hesitantly. They started down the hill where the trench was found. The grass was flat and the tarp was now gone. They'd walked around for 15 or so minutes when Bill headed up the stream a little ways. The trail runs under a main road and then leads to a man-made lake. Just under the bridge, the water starts to get heavier and the trees are a bit thicker. He noticed a red Lowe's cart into one of the trees. I'm taking that for the shop, he thought, as he ran over to pull it out of the stream. Calling over to Hank for help, the two of them pull it out and start wheeling it back up the hill. Suddenly, my dad stops. He sees something on the cart. What is that rusty stuff? Hank, stop. Look at that fucking cart. Is that blood? They look closer, and sure enough, blood. It was all over the cart, on the handle, on the wheels, and side. But it wasn't only blood they started to notice. Hair. Human hair. Utterly stunned, my dad calls the policewoman he had been talking to the previous days and explained what they found. For whatever reason, the PD was very skeptical that this was evidence. At first they didn't even believe my father. When he told them that it made no sense to make up, they sent out a car. There were 2 police officers and a CSI. The CSI asked my dad why he thought this was blood. It looks like blood, sir. I'm not sure. How do you know that is human hair? The CSI asked. Because it looks like human hair, my dad snapped sarcastically. Why did he seem so hesitant? They used a chemical test, and sure enough, it tested positive for human blood. They took the card as evidence and thanked my dad. Again, my dad tried to give his opinion on who the mystery killer might be. He suggested again that they talk with the crazy neighbors behind his auto shop. Still no information was taken down, and they left with what they had. 2 more days pass. My dad is leaving the shop to get some things from Costco. There is a small dirt alley that leads to the main road just behind his work. In the past, it had been blocked by one of the meth addicts' car. They were complaining to my dad and his boss about the business driving cars back and forth through the alley, disrupting them. He notices it's open and decides to take the shortcut to its destination. but something was off. He saw the usual blocked car sitting in front of the shack. The door was wide open, and there was someone sitting on their knees with their upper body inside the car. He got in his car and crept up, just a little, so he could see what was happening. He right away recognized the skinny red-headed woman as the female that lived in the shack. It was the shack's guy's wife or girlfriend. He didn't know exactly. She was on her hands and knees surrounded with hard chemicals. Bleach, Comet, OxyClean, and much more. My dad had said that he knew right then that they were guilty. For one, why would someone be scrubbing their car with straight chemicals? No water, no rinsing. It was the middle of the day on a hot June afternoon. Second, they happened to be only 2 blocks away from a local car wash. He said it felt off, and he knew to trust his instincts. She just kept scrubbing and scrubbing the passenger side floor. He pulled out his phone and started recording her. Now, he's known this woman and her significant other for a few years now. Like I said, they complained about my father's workers and he complained about their dogs on and off for a while. It was all harmless bickering. My dad, always trying to be the funny guy, yells out his window as he's driving past. "Covering up a murder?" He laughed and drove away, hearing her say "fuck you" as he drove off. This time when he called the police, they took it very seriously. He explained that she was cleaning the car aggressively and that it seemed like she was trying to bleach something out of the car. The next day, the PD went by to talk with the residents of the shack. The day after that, they made an arrest. After searching the shack, they found a large blood stain soaked into the plywood floor. Once the blood was seen, the wife-girlfriend crumbled and told the police everything. It was her husband, boyfriend, and the victim. The victim was named Rich. He had gone over to their little house to shoot up and get high. Someone ended up accusing Rich of putting some of the dope aside for himself, and things got heated. Eventually, the husband started to physically fight with Rich when he stabbed him. He bled out on the floor and died. They didn't know what to do, so they stole the Lowe's cart to move him around, loaded him into the car, wrapped him in the tarp, and pushed his body down the hill. They ditched the cart, thinking the river would wash it down far enough that it wouldn't be found. My dad and Hank sat in their car while they watched the police arrest Don, the suspected murderer. He took a video of that as well. You can hear my dad very inappropriately yelling out his window, "Haha, killer," in the video. Both were videos lost when he switched phones. Now my dad says that he's going to start a PI business because he solved a murder all on his own.
This all happened about a year ago. After 2 months of being married to my husband, I became pregnant with our daughter. We were more shocked than happy. We were only 22 years old, and we were wanting to put building a family on hold for a couple of years while adjusted to married life. I was stressed out most of the time and worried about everything related and not related to the pregnancy. My husband called me paranoid and a worrywart. I was about 4 months pregnant when I started to believe that I was being watched by someone. I would see a white 2006 Impala drive by my house at least once a week as I was leaving for work and following me there. I told my husband, and he laughed me off, calling me paranoid. It was just pregnancy hormones. I thought maybe I was just being a little paranoid and left it at that. One day, I was at the supermarket, and there was this middle-aged man just staring at me and followed me through the store at a distance. I told myself I was probably overthinking things and went to the checkout. The man left the store and I dropped my suspicions. As I walked out to my car, I noticed the white Impala that I had previously mentioned in the supermarket parking lot, but it could have been anybody's. I started driving home, and just a few miles away from the store, the Impala came up behind me and followed me until I came to my house, and he drove on, and I didn't even see that car for 2 weeks after. My husband and I were in bed and I couldn't sleep, so I got up to walk around the house and get some water. I was at the sink getting water from the tap, and I happened to look out the window and saw the outline of someone. I froze, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me, and the figure ran off. I screamed for my husband, and he came bursting out of our room, buck naked, bless his heart, and asked me what's wrong. I told him what had happened. He didn't believe I saw someone. He blamed it on the hormones again, and I was furious and started yelling at him and crying. He told me that I should talk to someone because it could be stress-induced, whatever is causing me to see things and be so paranoid, and that he told my mom and his about what I was going through, and they thought I had been acting off as well, and told him to have me talk to my doctor. I agreed to call my doctor only because I was very stressed out, not because I thought it was paranoia causing me to see someone and think I'm in danger. I talked to my family doctor the following week, and she told me that it sounded like pregnancy-induced anxiety along with depression, and told me that she suggested I get on medication for that immediately because it can get worse. That upset me a lot because I knew that it wasn't just hormones making me feel this way. Someone was actually following me. Things were pretty calm for a month after that. My husband was working late one night, and I was in the kitchen cleaning up, and the security system started going off, and moments later, I got a phone call from the police station and asked them to come out immediately and phone my husband after, who left work early to come home after hearing what happened. The police checked to find the entrance that the alarm was set off, and it was the sliding door in the living room. The frame was busted. I told the cops about the previous incidents involving a man in a white Impala that were following me and told them I thought it was the same person. My husband apologized to me for not believing me. After that, I didn't feel safe there anymore, so my husband and I moved closer to my parents about an hour away. Nothing has happened yet, and crossing my fingers that nothing will.
So me and my friends Mike and Steve were all chilling at Steve's house late one night back in 2009. I remember specifically because we all went to go see the new Friday the 13th film earlier on that day. We were all just hanging out and listening to music and rocking out like the dorks that we are. My friend's parents were gone for the night, leaving the house all to ourselves. As the song slowly came to an end, we could still hear someone singing from outside. We look outside of the window and see a man under a nearby streetlight that was in front of the house. He was singing and clapping his hands while staring back at us. His long, dark hair was hanging down over his eyes. It was the most insane thing I've ever seen. The others just thought it was some drunk or crazy guy messing around with us, and that there was nothing to be worried about. They returned to their rocking. After the next song ended, they heard even louder singing coming from outside again. We opened the blinds to the bedroom window and saw the man's face pressed directly against the window, singing with a smile on his face. His face looked absolutely dreadful, covered with old scars and a row of crooked, blackened, rotting teeth. He was grinning from ear to ear. We quickly closed the blinds. Then one of my friends picked up the phone and dialed 911. The cops came and the man was gone by the time they had gotten there. The cops said that if he came back, to call again. So me and my friends didn't think that the creepy man would return after that. But then the phone suddenly rang. When Steve picked it up, he froze in total fear, mouth hanging wide open. He said he heard singing coming from the other end. He then slammed the phone down and called the cops again. This time they found the man lurking around in the backyard. Apparently the man was insane and escaped out of a local asylum. If you're wondering as to how he got Steve's home phone number, the house was for sale at the time, and Steve's dad got the brilliant idea to display the house number on the for sale sign. Genius, right? And the phone call was made from a stolen cell phone. None of us were in any immediate danger, but this was still nope as fuck. So, creepy, insane stalker that was singing outside my friend's window that night, let's never meet again.
New Year's Eve went out without a hitch, and I'd say it was a great success at work. I work as a bartender at a popular bar, and I knew I'd make bank, despite wishing I was with my friends. As a poor college student, this cash would definitely help me out. There's a shortcut that I usually take when I get out of work late. It takes you through the back of the strip where my bar is and leads you to the townhouse complex where my roommates and I live. They were outside the city partying. As I was walking back, I saw two men sitting on a curb smoking. There are a few other restaurants located in the vicinity of my bar, so I figured they were closing up there and taking a little break. I didn't make eye contact and walked along, but paid close attention to them. And then I heard, "Hey baby, I'd love to have a piece of that ass," directly behind me. Turning around, I saw that both guys had gotten up and were a short distance behind me, walking towards my direction. They were laughing and making lewd comments to me. "Come on, babe, we'll take care of you tonight." This motherfucker. It's not safe for a pretty thing like you to be walking around this late. "Do you need a ride?" "Oh, we'll give you a ride, alright." I was absolutely terrified and knew I had to get away. The entrance to my complex was coming up, but I was afraid they will follow me to my house. Now, as soon as you enter the complex, the dumpsters are to your left. You essentially open the door and discard your trash in the bin. Knowing this, I came up with a plan. Though I picked up the pace, I could hear their footsteps grow closer. It was then I decided that I had one chance to get away. I took off in a run, darted left in my complex, opened the door to the dumpsters, and threw myself in, grabbing the door and slowly closing it so it didn't make any noise. I was surrounded by empty cartons of milk and sat in complete filth. There are little holes and spaces through the dumpster in which you can see outside. I found this out the hard way, obviously. I saw the man running past me while cursing and hollering, "Come on out, bitch! Come on, bitch! We won't hurt you!" One of the guys turned around and faced the dumpster, reached in his jacket, and pulled out a knife. Man, forget this shit, man. Fuck this shit, man. Let's go get another bitch, man. I'm tired of looking for her. She could be anywhere. You cannot possibly fathom the relief I felt when I saw them turn around and leave the complex. I sure as hell did not get out, though, fearing that they'll be waiting right there past the entrance. I pulled out my cell phone and called the police right then and there, telling the dispatcher that I'm hiding in a dumpster. They pulled in 5 minutes later, though those 5 minutes felt like an eternity. They said I did the right thing by staying inside until they showed up. I gave them a description and prayed that these two are caught as soon as physically possible. Totally, I enrolled in an MMA class and will arm myself anytime I go out.
So, I just got back from the store, and I gotta share this experience I just had with you guys. It may not be as scary as some of the other encounters posted to this subreddit, but it still gives me the chills. Let me start off by saying that this morning I wasn't in the best of moods. I had to work the graveyard shift last night and woke up after only 4 hours of sleep with my back killing me. I couldn't get back to sleep, so I decided that I would go run a few errands since I was now wide awake. I needed to get a haircut while I was out as well. My sister works at a salon that is right next to a Target. So after I got my sister to mow my scalp, for free by the way, I popped over to Target, intending to grab a few things before heading home. So, I was pushing my cart down the frozen food section, and I turned the corner to go into the next aisle. When I did, there was a middle-aged lady that was pushing her cart heading in the opposite direction. I nearly bumped into her, but stopped before our carts collided. She gave me a mean look and said in a real bitchy tone, "Excuse me." Now, again I have to say I wasn't in the best moods, and I'm a short-tempered person as it is, so without thinking, I shot back at her and said, "Shut up, you're fine." Call me an asshole if you want. No one's perfect. What would happen next was just pure insanity. The lady then suddenly left her shopping cart and started to follow me. I noted this about halfway down the aisle, and I turned around to ask what her problem was. Then, I shit you not, she rolled her eyes back into her head, pointed at me, and screamed very loudly. When I say screamed, I mean she was shrieking at the top of her lungs. It was like something out of The Exorcist. I turned down the aisle to get away from this insane person, but she started running after me, still pointing at me. Needless to say, all the bystanders immediately stopped what they were doing and stared at us. The lady kept screaming like a banshee at the top of her lungs while she chased me around the store. Well, I noped the fuck out of there. Didn't feel like explaining the situation to an employee, and I couldn't stand hearing that ear-piercing scream a second longer. I ran out of the exit of the store. I looked back into the store as I headed for my car. The lady was standing just outside the now open automated sliding doors, but she was still inside the store, if that makes sense. While she stood there, her mouth was hanging wide open, and she was still pointing at me, and her eyes were still rolled back into her head. All you could see were the whites of her eyes. She suddenly turned around and briskly walked back into the store. I decided to pick up my stuff at Walmart, just down the street instead. All I could think the entire drive home was, what the fuck was that? Creepy, screaming, possessed banshee lady. Perhaps I shouldn't have been so rude, but you still have more than one screw loose in your noggin. Let's not meet again.
I'm currently a uni student, and on Tuesday nights, I come home pretty late. Not late enough that my parents would call the police, but just missing the regular bus times. Anyway, as luck would have it, I managed to catch the very last bus one Tuesday night after getting to the station, and typically, it's nothing to be worried about. If you keep to yourself and stick to safe-looking people, you'll be alright. Growing up in a dangerous country and migrating to a much safer one hasn't rid me of those instincts. And that night, I got all bad vibes and buzzy. Something was off about that evening, and I didn't know what. We get to the main stop, and I find out that the bus had terminated its route. It's done for the night. Thanks, asshole bus driver. Well, fuck. It's dark, it's late, I can't drive, my parents can't pick me up, and I'm too broke to afford a taxi. So I decide to walk home. The exercise will be good for me. Now from the main stop, it will take me a good 20 to 30 minutes to reach my house if I power walked. I could probably run home, but fuck that. When you leave the shops, if you follow the road, there's a local Catholic school, a public library, a public school, and a few bus stops along the way. Near the library is a traffic intersection, the most brightly lit area of this entire road. But it's a very small square. It's a joke, honestly. As I'm walking, it takes me less than a second to realize how fucking dark it was. It was a bit creepy walking by a local Catholic school with their massive fucking crucifix in the middle of the huge mass of land. In front of me is the girl who looks about my age, Asian, and she's walking fairly quickly. Understandable. From the corner of my eye, across the road, I see a man kind of half jogging, half walking, and I'm not sure what he's up to, but it was just weird. I kept an eye on him and the girl. At the intersection, my friend is there, and he greets me enthusiastically, a hug and a kiss on the cheek. He momentarily distracts me from the weird running dude and the girl. Between my friend and I greeting each other, I completely miss when the guy crossed the street and is in my path. My friend turns out to be a douchebag friend and just leaves even after I told him about the weird dude. I'm not far from the creep and the girl now, but he's talking to her. And if a guy has any common sense, he will not speak to any girl or woman while she's alone at night, because we've all heard the horror stories. By this stage, I'll quicken my pace into a sprint, holding onto my backpack so that my laptop inside won't make so much noise, and I'm accessing my very limited options on how to save this poor woman. I'm a very small, very unintimidating Asian girl, and the guy looked taller the closer I got. I felt very tiny and incredibly stupid for doing this because I was still kind of far, but I have a crazy good eyesight and the streetlights were hitting his face so I can make it out accurately enough in case I needed to identify him. He was a white male, early 30s to 40s, brown hair, wearing glasses, striped long sleeve top and brown khakis. His eyes were really big though, kind of like that face you make when someone surprises you with something particularly scandalous. And I come up with what was probably the most stupidly brilliant plan I've ever concocted. I kinda stood there, hoodie on, feet apart, hands on my hips, and my best, loudest impersonation of an older Filipino woman getting mad at her child with the strongest accent I could. Honestly, if I were a bit taller, I might not would have got away with this. Hi, what are you doing, huh? You were supposed to be home already and talking to a boy, huh? And he's white? Excuse me, look at me while I'm talking to you. I did not raise you like this. And I don't remember exactly word for word what I say, but I'm basically copying whatever my mom says when she's angry with me. The entire time I'm yelling, and I can see the guy trying to inch away, and the girl looks so bewildered, like a deer caught in the headlights. At this stage, honestly, I'm expecting her to run away. I turn to the guy. And where you think you're going, huh? Puta ain't gonna crush your titty. He fucking ran for it. Like I swear, it was like watching a cartoon. The girl was still standing there, and I took off my hood and waved to her. I was still far away and asked if she was alright in my regular, not very Filipino accent. She was just staring at me. I apologized if I scared her, but I had to get him away because my younger sister would tell me about a creepy guy that corners young girls in a park not far from where I live. Anyway, we hugged and exchanged names and numbers, and now we're basically friends forever. It turns out that she didn't live very far, and didn't even realize what was happening until she couldn't get away from the creep. I ended up walking her home, and from there, her older brother dropped me off. We called the police while we walked to her place. When we retold the story to our families, they banned us completely from taking the bus past 7. I was reluctant in telling my friends this because I knew they'd laugh, but it was such a serious thing. What if I wasn't there? As comical as it sounded, she was really shook up, but very relieved and grateful. She kept hugging me and stuff, which is weird. I don't usually hug strangers. Police later stopped a station wagon about 20 minutes down the main road, and it was a man matching my description. They searched his car and found a few photos of girls in the glove department and even more in his phone. They were all Asian, specifically Filipino. Months later, after I found out about this, Mom tells me they actually found photos of my sister and I. It made me shudder. If that creep ever came near my little sister, I would fuck him up.
So, this happened about 3 years ago, and I still get chills from it now. I used to live in a small town outside of New York. This was the kind of town where everybody knew everybody. I lived with my parents and my younger sister. My parents don't drink coffee, so there is no reason for them to have a coffee machine, but I enjoy drinking it. So one morning, I had tickets to go see Les Miserables with a friend in downtown Manhattan, and I had this long drive in front of me, so I wanted to get a cup of coffee from the garage station. This is about 8:30 a.m. I walked in, and the first thing that I noticed was the eeriness of the whole garage at the time. I got my cup of coffee and was just walking to my car when I heard sort of like a loud whisper from beneath my car saying, "Hey, lady, hey." And by now, I'm kinda creeped out, because first of all, it's quite early in the morning, and second of all, I could now see someone under my car. It was a middle-aged man looking quite rough, and he had some specs and a pencil mustache. I didn't really know what to do because I was afraid of walking to my car and getting close to the man. By now he was getting out from underneath and was walking towards me, so I sped up a bit back towards the store, and he followed me, sort of jogging. I ran into the store and went straight for the back, but still in view from the lady at the cash register. The guy walks in, spots me, and starts walking towards me. So I turn the other way just to make sure he is actually following me, and by the time I get back outside the store, he is already turning the handle to walk out. In panic mode, I drop my coffee, run to my car, get in, and drive off. From my mirror, I can see this guy running after my car, so I turn the left onto the highway. As soon as I am calmed down, I get my phone out and call my mom. I tell her everything that happened to me, and she says it was probably just some druggie. So guy with pencil mustache, let's not meet again.
Please excuse my bad writing skills. It's around 1:30 a.m. and I just want to get my story out there. So this happened a few weeks ago, and I'm still trying to get over how crazy this was. I'm only 15, and this has to be one of the most fucked up things that has ever happened to me. My friend and I, whom we will call Cody, had been to the cinema and we were getting back pretty late, probably around 1 a.m. We stupidly decided to go to Tesco, a major supermarket here in Scotland, to get food and drink in order to just stay out all night. Also, may I add, yes, it was very fucking cold, but I had gloves and a jacket and shit, so it was fine. Back to the story. We spent a few hours in his garage, which happens to have an Xbox in it, drinking vodka and smoking weed because why the fuck not? We wanted to have some fun, but for some fucking stupid reason we decided to take some ecstasy, or eckies as we call them. We took one pill each, and we were waiting for it to kick in. Already drunk and high, we decided to head out. After getting out of his estate and walking another 10 minutes or so, we got to a local wooded area where people take their dogs walking. We started gathering some wood for a fire. when we both stopped in our tracks to hear the sound of metal dragging along concrete. We turned around to see two dark, hooded figures walking slowly towards us, maybe 80 feet away, dragging sledgehammers along the nearby path. We completely legged it and did not stop sprinting until we were back at his garage. Forgetting that we had taken these pills, they kicked in. And boy do I wish I hadn't taken one of those fucking things. The rush kicked in, and before we could even consider what had just happened, we decided to go back out there, armed. Cody, I shit you not, taking an axe from his garage, and me with a baseball bat and a knife in my pocket. We headed back out. Once we were back in the forest, I used my Zippo for light, and Cody used a torch. Why two lights, you ask? One, so we could both see and look in different directions, and two, we were high as fuck. We got a good half-mile into the forest when both of our lights went out. A lighter and a torch. The sound of snapping branches filled the forest, surrounding us, gradually getting louder. We freaked out and ran faster than I thought was possible. Nearing the end of the wooded area, the two figures stood, motionless, hoods over their heads, at the exit, still with sledgehammers. By this time, the MDMA had kicked into full throttle, and we both carried on towards them, swinging our weapons, getting closer and closer, until the next thing I remember. Cody woke me up in his garage around 7 a.m. Being startled, I looked around myself. Lighter, bat, and knife on the ground. I then noticed that I was just in my underwear, and my stomach was sliced. Not badly, but enough that there was blood from it that had trickled onto my leg. Maybe 2 inches across, and a half an inch deep. Then Cody pointed out that there was fucking hair in my wound. Not much, but it was thick and black, 100% neither mine or his, as we both have blonde hair. I noticed Cody's face and back are engraved with deep scratches, and that his t-shirt was nowhere to be found. My bat had weird oily liquid on it, and Cody's axe had small amounts of thick blood that did not look directly human in any way. We sat in silence for 10 minutes before I decided that it was best to leave. Cody and I have not spoke about this since, as we both know that what happened was completely fucked up. I dread to even think what happened that night beyond the barriers of my memory.
One rainy night in July, a friend and I were road tripping home from a long vacation. We had been on the road for hours and grew very tired. However, we kept pushing on. We consumed stimulants such as coffee and engaged in motivational conversation to pass the time by. But our eyes were quickly sinking, and we saw signs for an exit in the distance. We veered off onto an exit for Springfield, Ohio. We instantly began searching for a hotel of some sort. Up ahead in the distance, we saw a sign for Night's Inn. If you've never been to a Night's Inn, it's a fairly cheap motel. Minimal breakfast, shady rooms. It's a low price per night, but you get what you pay for. My friend and I approached the front desk and requested a room. The owner didn't speak hardly any English, but after dealing with a language barrier for 10 minutes or so, everything was situated and we were set to stay in room 13. We walked towards the room and began growing more and more tired. I slid the key into the door, and after a subtle click, the door unlocked and I pushed my way inside. The room was aesthetically underwhelming. It had a faint smell of cigarettes and Cheetos. I kid you not. But a room is a room, so after taking a shower, I climbed onto my twin-sized bed, and my friend did the same. Within 10 minutes or so, we both dozed off. 5 a.m. I was abruptly awoken by heavy banging on the door. I glared over at my friend, who shot up as quickly as me, trembling in fear. Only the banging didn't subside. It was persistent. After 3 minutes being frozen in fear, I slyly crawled to my phone, avoiding the main window. I dialed 911, explaining the situation, and they claimed they were sending an officer out right away. The banging was still going on, so I screamed, "What do you want?" It instantly stopped. I heard muffled voices, and they began to fade away. At this point, it was around 5:30 a.m. and still dark outside. I crawled up to the door and glared out the peephole, and nothing was there. As soon as I slipped back down, a loud bang echoed through the room as the attacker began to pound on the window. A deep voice was heard laughing, and as soon as it began again, it stopped. The cops never showed. Right when daylight beamed into the room, we booked her to the car and drove off. This, however, was not the unsettling part. The next day, as I got home, which was maybe around an hour or so away, I began to watch the news. A 40-year-old man was found in room 14, right next door to ours at the Knights Inn Motel. He had many weapons and had kidnapped a 14-year-old girl who claimed she was in love with him. To this day, I'm not sure who was banging on my door that morning, but I'm so thankful I didn't answer.
This story takes place over a year time span. I was with my best friend. We'll call him Josh. Josh was at my house. We were broing out, playing video games, you know, all that stuff you do with your friends. After a while of playing video games, we got bored. Josh suggested we go on a walk. It's around 12:45 a.m. I live in a relatively safe neighborhood, though. We're walking and we come to a street I haven't been down. We turn. Big mistake. We pass a house with a huge bay window, and we see a group of people in it. They're singing. You know those tips from a smoker commercials? That's what the singing sounded like. The singing is getting louder. Josh and I hide behind a bush in the yard to see what happens. I stand up and the front porch lights turn on because we were in range for the motion sensor. The group turns and stares right at Josh and I. In the dim light, we see they have upside down crosses on their heads and what appears to be blood. We book it down the road. We get back to my house and we don't say a word to each other. After Josh leaves the next day, I take my dog on a walk. I turn on the same street where the satanic ritual was the previous night. I see a crumpled up piece of paper on the ground. I uncrumpled it, and it was my Facebook profile picture with the eyes cut out and blood smeared on the picture. I ran home. I didn't tell anyone. Flash forward a year. Josh and I were taking my brother trick-or-treating, and we turn on that godforsaken street. We avoid that house. We go to the neighbors, and an old lady in latex gloves with scraggly hair and a scratchy voice comes out and says, "God bless you," and made a cross on all of our foreheads. We leave that street after that. Josh and I don't speak about what happened. Believe what you want, but I'm telling the truth.
This happened over a decade ago, somewhere in northern Michigan during the summer. My friend, Kathy, 18, My boyfriend's half-sister May, 16, and I, 17, drove down from our hometown to visit friends. We were on our way back in Kathy's shitty little Geo. By shitty, I'm talking this piece of crap had engine problems, overheating problems, ignition problems, and was constantly falling apart. More than once, it had stalled or just stopped working in the middle of the street while we were trying to get somewhere. But Kathy thought we'd be fine, since we hadn't had any problems with it on the way to our friend's house. It's a little past midnight, and we're roughly an hour away from home. There's nobody on the road, dense woods on every side, no streetlights, no moon. I can barely see past the windshield because I have a form of albinism, which leaves me legally blind in my left eye and with really awful vision in my right. My depth perception is terrible, and I can't see more than a few feet ahead of me at most, but usually I can make out lights and other cars when they pass, and sometimes street signs and people when they are close enough. We drove down this narrow, hilly road, and on the descent down a hill, the Geo makes a strange sound. Kathy starts braking, and when we get to the bottom of the hill, the car quits working. Kathy swears and turns on the hazard lights. She and I get out of the vehicle, and I help pop the hood, which causes a bunch of smoke to fly out. After the smoke mostly clears, Kathy tries to figure out what went wrong this time. We stand in the dark for at least 45 minutes, maybe longer, before we realize she couldn't fix the car and needed a tow truck. These were the days of MapQuest printouts and brick phones, so we couldn't whip out our smartphones and look up the closest tow truck. I decided to call my boyfriend Caleb to come pick us up and suggest we come with a tow to pick up the Geo when it was daylight. May and Kathy agree, so I take out my cruddy Nokia and called my boyfriend. It's then I realize, no service. I ask May and Kathy if either of them have service. They both check and shake their heads. May gets a bit panicky, and we all hold our phones up, trying to get a signal to no avail. It's hot as fuck, and after failing to get any kind of service, we are all feeling a bit spooked and uncomfortable. May begs us to do something because she is more afraid than Kathy and I. Kathy attempts to calm May down, and I wonder if the thick woods and hills are blocking out our reception. I tell May and Kathy to wait by the car and walk away from them up the hill we had just come down, holding my phone out. Still no signal. I walk further and further away until I reach the top of the hill. I can't see the outline of the Geo anymore, but I can still hear May at a distance. Even at the top of the hill, I don't get a signal. I know it's gotta be the trees in the way, so I get the idea of climbing up a tree and calling from there, just to see if it works. In hindsight, this was not my brightest idea, but me being an idiot, I saunter off into the woods in search of a climbable tree. At this point, I just want to go home, and this is the only thing on my mind. I find a nice one with low branches and lift my body upwards towards the trunk. I climb the branches higher and higher, and about midway up the tree, I feel my pack of cigarettes fall out of my shorts pocket. I'm kind of annoyed, but figured I can just look for them when I climb back down. I take my phone out and hold it up once I get near the top. I have service. Relieved, I call Caleb, but he doesn't pick up, so I call again until he does. He answers in a sleepy but pissed voice, but I'm having none of that and simply explain our situation. He asks where we are, and I give the name of the road and my best guess as to how far along we are on it. He says he will be on his way and tells me to go back and wait with May and Kathy, then yells at me for being stupid and climbing a tree in the dark with my bad depth perception. I assure him that I'm fine, and he's skeptical but says okay, and we hang up. I start climbing down the tree, but my hand touches a big glob of sap, so I stop and try to wipe the sticky goop off on my shirt. I'm already sweaty and gross, so I'm not too happy about the sap. While I'm failing at getting this crud off my hands, I hear the strangest sound from somewhere below me. I completely freeze, not being able to place what the hell that sound is, but it's moving pretty fast. I stare down into the darkness below me, but can't see shit. Just hear this noise continuing. It comes closer and closer, and then I hear it right below my tree. Swish. And then it stops, right under my tree. I hold onto the branches as tight as I can and wait. I hear leaves shuffling and twigs snapping, and after a while that stops, and the weird noise starts again, but it's heading away from me deeper into the woods. I wait until I can no longer hear the sound, then finish climbing down and jump out of the tree. It's completely silent now, besides the sound of the woods, so I grope around on the ground for my cigarettes. I don't find them, so I make my way out of the woods and back towards the road. I jog down a hill, and when I reach the bottom, I notice May and Kathy are not standing outside the car anymore, and the hazard lights are off. I walk over to the car, and May rolls down the window a little bit and whispers in a panicked voice, "Elizabeth, where the hell were you?" I point back over my shoulder towards the hill and start to explain that I called her brother, but Kathy yelled, "What are you doing? Get the fuck back in the car!" I give them a weird look, but May unlocks and opens the door, and I crawl into the back seat with her, slamming it behind me. Kathy slams the lock and double checks them while May rolls up the window and makes sure the rests are rolled up. One of the windows has never closed all the way, but there's less than a finger space, so it's not too big of a deal, but May is freaking out about it, and Kathy has lost her cool as well. I'm still confused and ask what the heck is going on. May tells me that a bit after I went up the hill, some weird person came out of the woods and ran really funny up the hill in the direction I went. They got freaked out and turned the lights off and got in the car. They thought he had got me. I am honestly scared at this point, because if I hadn't stopped to wipe sap off my hands, I most likely would have got out of the tree at the time I heard the weird noise. I just knew it was that person. I tell them my story, and everybody in the car is scared shitless, but we are relieved that Caleb is on his way. We only have to play the waiting game now. We sit on the road for what seems like forever. The dread we were feeling made time seem like it was going slower than normal. Kathy and May are looking out the windows, surveying the area, and I'm just sitting there hoping Caleb will hurry the fuck up and come rescue us. Suddenly, I hear May whine, "Oh my God," and she starts crying. Kathy snaps her head to where May is looking and stifles a gasp. I look where they are facing. I see nothing but dark. But then I hear it through the small opening in the window. Swish, swish. May ducks down, as though doing that will make her invisible, and Kathy hides her head behind the steering wheel. I follow their lead and sort of hunch down in my seat, but the noise comes straight up to the window. I can almost make out the silhouette of a tall, skinny man. And then he presses his face against May's window, and I finally see him. Nobody screams. You'd think we would, but it didn't happen. We all just stared at each other. He looks in at us for a while, until Kathy switches her brights on, hoping it would scare him off. But it did nothing. The dude just walked to the front of the car and stood in front of the headlights. Maybe he thought he would be blocking us from leaving. I don't know. I couldn't make out his features very well, but the guy had to have been somewhere a bit over 6 feet and no older than 30. He had the face of an average Joe, nothing special, nothing really sinister or particularly creepy that you'd notice about him if you ran into this dude in broad daylight. Dark shaved hair, pale skin, long face. May said he had light-colored eyes and stubbled with eyebrows that made him look like he was always concerned. But there was no way I could make that out, so I had to take her word for it. What was really weird was it was like 80 degrees, and this dude was wearing corduroys, which is what that sound was. Corduroys making that swishy noise when you walk, and an oversized sweater with abnormally long sleeves. The sleeves went over his hands and flopped back and forth as he paced around in front of the Geo. I'm not sure how long he was in front of the car, but it was a while. Then good old Corduroy starts doing something really bizarre. He bends his arms up towards his face, which I can only describe as looking like a praying mantis because of the way his sleeves were hanging, and then he begins walking circles around the car, rhythmically taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back like goddamn Willy Wonka, but on speed or something. This is where I noticed the swish sound matched up exactly to the same sound I heard when I was back in the tree. He was doing this 2 steps forward, 1 step back in the fucking woods when he was going after me, as though this wasn't weird enough. By now, May was sobbing, and Kathy seemed like she had to vomit, so I felt like I had to be the brave one. I looked at the slight space in the open window, and when he orbited his way over there, I said, "Hey man, can you just stop? You're really freaking us out." Corduroy definitely heard me, so he swished to a halt and looked back into the car through the windshield, straight at me. I asked him very firmly to leave, and he took an extended pause, smiled, and then Willy Wonka'd his way out of my line of vision into the darkness. After a while, Kathy said he disappeared into the woods, and May was like, "I can't believe that worked." We awkwardly laughed about what a weirdo he was, and glad he left and whatever, and we went back to waiting for Caleb, somewhat reassured, but still paranoid. But after some time, Kathy said, "Oh no, he's back." I couldn't see, but apparently he was doing the 2 steps forward, 1 step back parallel to us on the side of the road. And this time he had a big tree branch he was holding with his sweater-covered hands. May got scared again, and I held her hand so she'd feel better about it, even though I was ready to shit myself. It was awful, because I didn't know if he was coming towards us or if he was moving our way or what the hell he was up to. It was kind of like when you knew there was going to be a jump scare in a horror movie. Then I hear Corduroy swish back towards the Geo and on my window. He smacks it with a tree branch. May and I panic, and I scoot as close to her as possible. They see the dude back up into the woods, then come running back and slamming the branch back into my window, like he's jousting with no horse. Thankfully, the window didn't break, but it got terrifying hearing swish, swish, honk, after a while, and he did this repeatedly. Kathy perks up in her seat and starts pointing at the road ahead. "I see headlights!" She blares the horn and flashes the lights. Lo and behold, it's our savior, Caleb. He brought his older brother Alex, and they both get out of his car and head over to us. May's sobs turn into joyous laughter as her brothers approach. Now, Caleb and Alex have always been tall guys. Walking around with them was like walking around with high elves. It felt very safe. Caleb was 6'8", and Alex is around 6'5", so I thought two dudes taller than Corduroy Jouster would make him leave. But nope. Caleb walks towards Corduroy, trying to assess the situation, and Alex comes over to the car and taps on the window, tells Kathy to get out. She does, and he walks over to his car, then comes back and puts the car in neutral so he can push it off the side of the road. May and I slowly get out, and May makes a bolt for her brother's car. I help Alex push the car to the side while Caleb distracts the Corduroy Jouster by holding the end of his stick and telling him to fuck the fuck off. Corduroy yanks the branch away from Caleb and starts backing up by going 2 steps backward, 1 step forward, and then disappears into the darkness down the street. I can't see him, but Caleb can. The dude backs up pretty far, and then comes launching at Caleb, who sprints the other way down the road, 'cause that stick could have really hurt him. He bumps past Alex, who had already got out of the Geo and was opening his car door, leaving me behind in the Geo alone. Corduroy apparently changed directions and aimed the stick at me, but I really couldn't tell. I just hear everybody shout, "Elizabeth!" This startles me, and I jump to the side of the Geo, hearing Corduroy smash his stick into the back window with a loud thud and a swish. I take the long way around the car and sprint off into the road and feel Caleb grab my arm and tug me over to Alex's car. I feel like the wind has been knocked out of me and my legs don't seem to work, but Caleb manages to shove me in the back seat and scrambles into the passenger side. By now we are all safely in the car, and Corduroy is standing like a mantis in front of the headlights. He'd abandoned his stick and just stood there with no intention to move. Alex puts the car into reverse and slams on the gas, making me knock my head against the door, then makes the sloppiest U-turn ever and nearly drives us into the woods, but gets us back onto the road. Everybody was in 100% what the fuck mode as Alex tore away, far over whatever the speed limit was. May and Kathy swear they saw Corduroy chasing behind us after Alex made the U-turn, but there was no way he was catching up. The next day, I went back there with Caleb, Kathy, and the dude from the tow truck. There was no sign of Corduroy anywhere, but when we approached the Geo, we saw that in the space where the window didn't close all the way were my cigarettes. The box was missing, but they were all neatly jammed in a row along the window space. I have no doubt it was the work of the Corduroy Jouster. To this day, I wonder if he knew I was up in the tree and took my cigarettes, or if he thought I dropped them and went further into the woods to look for me, or if he just found them later and decided to stick them through the window because he was fucking weird. I also still wonder what the hell his intentions were. I still have so many unanswered questions.
It was the summer before my senior year in college. My little brother, always interested in military stuff, had gotten a pair of night vision goggles for his birthday, and he'd left them at my apartment. One night, I was bored and decided to go try out the goggles at a wooded hiking area / nature preserve nearby. In retrospect, this seems like a very stupid idea since I was all by myself and female. But I was young and stupid, and I got myself all excited about the possibility of seeing deer and other woodland creatures in their natural nighttime habitat. I was familiar with these woods. My best friend and I hiked there at night before, and we'd never run into anyone else. Our area is mostly rural and pretty safe, so I didn't anticipate any trouble. I parked in the little, sparsely lit parking area, ignored the sign saying park closes at 10, and entered the woods, night vision goggles in hand. It was a half moon that night, and that was the only light that filtered down through the canopy of trees. It was pretty dark, and I didn't want to put on the goggles until I'd found a place to sit down, so I lit my way with the mini mag light on my keychain. A couple of times I thought I heard a little rustling in the woods a fair distance away, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, and I put it down to animal activity. Hopefully, the deer I'd come hoping to see. After I'd hiked in a fair distance, I found a fallen log to sit on and put on the goggles. I don't know if you've ever used night vision goggles before, but the effect is impressive. They can turn near-pitch darkness into something bright as day. Everything appears in various shades of green, but quite bright and clear. For a while, I had a blast looking around from my fallen log vantage point. Some chipmunks played around in the leaves nearby, and a big owl blinked its lamp-like eyes at me from a tree branch. No deer, though. And I started to think that maybe they wouldn't be likely to come anywhere near me, darkness or no, if I sat right out in the open on a log. So I decided to find a place where I could be a little more hidden. I made my way a little deeper into the woods and finally found a huge tree, perfect for climbing. I've always loved climbing trees, so it was nothing for me to hoist myself up a few branches and settle in to wait for my deer. I didn't get to see any. What I did see, lit up in bright night vision green after about 10 minutes of waiting, was this. A man, dressed head to toe in dark-colored clothing, making his way stealthily through the woods. He was coming from the same direction I'd come from, and was clearly trying to stay hidden, moving from tree to tree, and glancing around carefully before moving on again. It looked very much like he was looking for someone. It took me a few moments to notice that he was carrying something, and when I saw what it was, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He had a knife, a big one, and he was gripping it as if he expected to use it in the very near future. It wasn't deer hunting season, and this was a nature preserve where hunting of any kind was prohibited anyway. And at any rate, the guy was alone and not dressed like a hunter. There were no deer in sight, and very few hunters kill their prey with knives. I suddenly became horribly aware of my situation. A young woman, alone, weaponless, in the middle of the woods at night. This was the 1990s, so no cell phones. And even if I'd had one, I wouldn't have felt safe using it lest I draw his attention. I didn't know how he was able to see so well in the dark. My guess was that his eyes must have adjusted, and I was terrified he would look up and see me. I sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, and watched him as he continued his methodical and stealthy process of scanning the forest for who or whatever the hell he was stalking. I scanned around but couldn't see anyone else, even from my high vantage point, and the sickening thought struck me that he might be looking for me. I remembered the rustling noises I'd heard in the woods when I first arrived, and then I thought back further and remembered something else. A white car that had followed too close behind me for most of my drive to the nature preserve. I'd been annoyed and a little freaked out at the time, but when I turned into the nature preserve parking area, the white car had passed me and driven on its way, and I hadn't thought anything more of it. Now I wondered, horrified, if this was the driver of that car. If he'd circled back and seen my parked car, alone in the lot. If he'd come in after me. I sat, paralyzed with fear, and watched the man for what felt like forever but was probably another half hour or so. There was a heart-stopping moment when he paused right underneath my tree, and I was sure he was going to look up and find me. But he didn't. After a while, he seemed to give up on whatever plan he had in mind. I heard him say, "Fuck it," and he started heading back in the direction he'd come, the direction of the parking area. I stayed in the tree, wet from sweat and crying until the sun came up a few hours later. Then I climbed down and, still terrified, gripping the little can of pepper spray on my keychain, I made my way as fast as I could to the parking lot. The man had been there. My windshield had been smashed with a rock, and someone had scraped all down the sides of my car with something sharp. Presumably, a giant knife that I'm lucky didn't end up in my chest. Thank God for the night vision goggles that let me see him before he could see me. And thank God for big trees with sturdy branches.
This story goes back a few years ago when I was a 17-year-old high school student. Every day I'd walk the 25 or 30-minute journey to and from school. There was a shortcut I could take home that took some time off the walk, and as a nature lover, the shortcut was very enjoyable. Here's a diagram, since the setting of the story is not very easy to describe. Sorry for the shitty 3D representation. Whenever I'd walk home alone, I would take this shortcut to enjoy the small amount of forest we have in the medium-sized, moderately busy city I lived in. My shortcut was pretty well traveled, and I would occasionally see other people walking from their neighborhood towards the busy streets close by, or other students walking home from a high school or the college. Sometimes there would be no one but me on the path. To give you an idea, the path definitely was not groomed, but it was traveled enough that you could make out a path from being trampled over the years. The shortcut started off from the busy road by my high school and went into a low-lying open wooded area with some small ponds. After a few minutes of this, I could veer right up the big hill towards the street parallel to my street. One day, I was walking home from school after staying a bit late for extra help. A few minutes into my shortcut, I noticed a guy standing off the main path a bit, seemingly minding his own business and talking on a cell phone. There was an open backpack sitting on the ground by his feet. Growing up with overprotective parents and in martial arts, I have always been a very cautious person and take in a lot of details, especially being a young girl out walking alone. This wasn't unusual by any means, since the entire low-lying area is traveled and there are numerous paths off the main path leading different directions, since it isn't a thick forest. sort of like a free-for-all for walking. Sometimes people would stand off the busy road while waiting for the bus stop close by, not wanting to stand in all the traffic fumes while people sped by during rush hour. The only thing I took caution of was that I had been seeing him there a few times that week and had never seen him before. But all well, maybe he was a college student or just moved into the area. This time walking on the shortcut felt different though, possibly because there was no one else on the path today. But I started to get this bad feeling in my stomach, the one everyone has a hard time describing, but most people know too well. Something was not right. I was already well along my shortcut though, and I decided to blame my feelings on me being paranoid, which is not uncommon of me. I kept an eye on him out of my peripheral vision walking by, and he continued to talk on his cell phone and didn't seem suspicious, so I continued on my merry way. I must have walked 20 or 25 meters away when the guy stopped talking on the phone, and I felt an even bigger feeling of dread in my gut. I turned around to see him crouched over, phone gone, fidgeting around with some sort of cloth in a brown glass bottle. Before I had a second to register what the fuck he was doing, his head shoots up my direction, and the look in his eyes is a terrifying mix between I've been caught and I'm not stopping now. He drops everything, leaving his shit behind, and starts sprinting straight for me, cloth in hand. At this point, I'm too far away from the busy road for anyone to see me in the low-lying woodland with this crazy fuck, and I'm too far away to scream bloody murder. My first instinct in that split-second decision is to run towards my neighborhood. I decided this all as I turned around, throwing my heavy backpack to the ground and sprinting as far as I could, starting up the hill towards my neighborhood. Judging by appearance, this guy looked like he could break me in two with no effort, and I trusted my flight response more than my fight response. Plus, I didn't know what the fuck he had in his hand. All throughout school, I had been the top cross-country and track runner in my entire school, out of the female and male teens. My running had been my savior on a few other let's-not-meet worthy occasions, but soon into this chase, I knew it wouldn't be enough this time. This guy was fucking fast as shit, and I could tell he was slowly gaining on me without even looking back. I finally see some fenced-in backyards up ahead and hope people are home from work. I start trying to scream help as much as I could with my out-of-breath and useless voice. I make a split-second decision to start jumping fences up people's yards, hoping this guy's hurdling skills are shittier than his running. The first fence throws him off, but by the second one into the next yard, he is on my ass, and I feel him come insanely close to grabbing my leg. I am shitting myself at this point. I see no cars and driveways, no sign of anyone home, and the only thing that is keeping me from panicking and wiping out in my exhausted state is thinking that I may not ever see my family or friends again. The next yard belongs to people I know rather well, including their dog. Necessary background interruption. This house was close to my street on the street parallel to mine, and I have come to know their dog rather well since they recently moved in. My friend hated the shortcut, and sometimes I would walk to school with her on the street down the hill to the busy street. This dog was huge and an absolute maniac, and usually, when kids were walking to school, they would put him in the backyard instead of their front yard, since he would growl and scare the shit out of kids walking by while he was tied outside. I love animals, so every time we'd walk by, I'd talk calmly to him through his menacing, "I'll fuck you up" barks. Every time he'd be slightly less vicious to me, until one day the nice people who lived there gave me a treat to give to him, and after that, the dog was a nice stop on the way to school. The dog's name is Leo. With that next yard, My newly acquired friend in sight, I had never felt hope like I did in that moment. By some insane stroke of luck, they let him out of their backyard for the afternoon while they were at work. When Leo saw me frantically running toward him, he started wagging his tail, then looked at the guy chasing close behind me, and he started growling. I thought this would be enough to get the guy to fuck off, but no. He started to jump over the fence the second after I did, but the dog jumped up, and his teeth came so close to his face that the creep fell backwards into the yard, straight on his ass as I fell into the dog's yard on my ass. The creep and I stared at each other out of breath for a few seconds, while the dog was barking and jumping like mad at the fence at him. Maybe he was assessing if he could take on Leo or not. I prayed the creep didn't have a knife or something. The guy looked angrier than I had ever seen a person, and after a few seconds got up and started running back down the hill from where we came. I sat there for a few seconds in complete shock and couldn't move, until my hero started licking my face. I snapped out of it and ran to the back door and started pounding. They obviously weren't home, or else they probably would have heard what just went down. My house was close, so I jumped the fence and ran the rest of the way home and called the cops to investigate and try to find the guy. I gave them the best description I could after coming practically face to face with him. The dude's bag was gone, and so was every trace of him. They found my poor backpack in a muddy puddle, and the police told me they'd keep looking. Never saw the guy again, and I didn't hear anything more about it, and after calling the office a few times, I gave up. They told me during that time they had received sketchy reports, people being stalked, chased, etc., but nothing like mine. Over the last few months there were a few missing person cases, but in a city like the one I'm from, not the worst, but not the best, you can never connect anything like that for sure. The more I thought about it over the years, the more fucked up it is and the more confused I am. First, if he was trying to kidnap me, why didn't he think of a better way to grab and snatch me into the forest before I had the chance to get away, or before another trail goer possibly walked by? He didn't appear to have a weapon on him or anything except that creepy cloth. And what the hell did he have in his hand? A friend thought it may have been chloroform, but I did research on it, and apparently it's more a myth that pouring it onto a rag and covering a person's face causes them to faint very quickly. Plus, where the hell would you get it anyway? Thanks to that asshole, I never walk the shortcut anymore without at least 2 friends and pepper spray or some sort of protection. So, sex trade kidnapper, amateur stalker, serial killer, or whatever the fuck you are, let's never meet again. Leo got lots of extra lovings whenever I saw him.
This was going to be short, but the memory sprung into my mind a couple days back, and I thought it would be worth sharing. I live in North Wales, United Kingdom. For anyone who's had the pleasure of visiting, it truly is a beautiful place to live, though for an adolescent boy, it's certainly lacking in things to do. As a result, my friends and I would often find ourselves mindlessly exploring areas of countryside and coastline. Despite it being quite sparsely populated in comparison to the closest cities, there's a dual carriageway running along the coast from Wales to England. Also, train tracks run alongside this road for most of its course, occasionally passing overhead via a small cement bridge. Anyway, there was one night a few years ago when about 4 of us randomly decided to try and explore inside one of these bridges, as one of the group had observed a manhole cover nearby, which we believed to be the entrance. On closer inspection, we discovered that several tools would be required in order to gain entry. We returned with the necessary equipment and proceeded to unbolt the cover. This had to be done stealthily, as the train track was right beside us, not close enough to be of any danger, but definitely a sufficiently small distance to cause panic for any train driver. And panic usually means police. It wasn't long before we had removed the heavy steel disc and had started descending the ladder down into the structure. Once we had all safely reached the bottom, we decided to progress to the other side. At this point, we are totally confined into the narrow space that leads into the main area. If you're confused as to what the hell this bridge is supposed to be, you probably should be, because it was rather peculiar. I mean, I would have never known there was even an inside at all had we not found the manhole. So, as we squeeze and crouch and at one point scrape along our bellies to the other side of the structure, there's a growing sense of claustrophobia between us. The distance from one end to the other is surprisingly long, but by the halfway point you can look down through narrow gaps onto the motorway below. This was actually pretty cool, which helped keep us calm in a strange way. At this point, apart from the mild discomfort and confinement, we were still just a group of guys on an adventure. This was about to change dramatically. No more than a few meters beyond halfway, which we could tell due to the symmetry of the passageways through the bridge, one of us claimed they could see some object in the distance at the far end. Slightly hesitantly, we agreed to investigate. Bad move. I reached the end first, and let me tell you, I have never felt the same sense of dread before or since. In front of me was a single fold-away chair positioned facing a wall. On the wall was a partially torn page from a newspaper or a magazine showing a fully naked lady in an erotic position. The reason I don't just refer to it as porn is because something was different about it. I can't put my finger on it, but it seemed more sinister than sexy, if that makes any sense. More disturbingly, the eyes of the woman on display had been cut from the page, removed with precision, not just hastily ripped off. The scene that lay before us had rendered us completely speechless, and an overpowering sense of panic could be felt collectively. That was when we found the condom. The horrendous, gut-wrenching, blood-drenched condom. Needless to say, we got the fuck out of there as fast as humanly possible, smashing our knees and shins against the sharp cement edges that lined the path to the ladder by which we had entered. Of course, we were all praying to God that the manhole hadn't been resealed, as it was impossible to tell until you reached the ladder itself. Thankfully, the exit route was clear, and we promptly dashed as far away as our legs could carry us. I'm sure this ending comes as a disappointment to some of you reading this, as we, luckily, never bumped into the twisted individual who sits in that chair. But I must stress how radically out of the norm this was given where I live. The reason I mentioned the population earlier was with purpose. There is easily enough people here to escape the realms of crazy country folk, yet nowhere near enough people to have someone clearly lose grip on society without someone taking notice. For example, there was literally only one homeless man who everyone in the area knew and grew fond of, eventually resulting in a mass gathering at his funeral when he passed away. I sometimes think, though not recently as I had more or less forgotten about that night entirely, about the person who climbs down into that bridge and navigates through the darkness to sit facing a wall and do God knows what, that ends up with a condom full of blood. You honestly couldn't envision a more surreal situation.
This happened about a year ago. From 2013 to 2015, I worked night shift security at an RV resort. I was on my way to work one night when my front driver's side tire blew out on a long, narrow dirt road. It was around 10:30 p.m., so it was pretty dark. I live in a very secluded area in upstate Florida, and this road was not near any neighborhoods and had only a few street lights. My shift started at 11, so I called the manager and told her that I might be a little late because I had to change the tire. After I got that squared away, I pulled out my car jack and started to position it underneath my Ranger. I was about to start cranking away when I saw the dim glow of some golf cart headlights approaching me from down the street in the direction I had just come from. I was thinking that it was probably a local, wondering what was going on and maybe they would be nice enough to give me a hand. The golf cart stopped behind my truck. I stood up from where I was crouching and said, "Hey there, one of my tires just blew out. You wouldn't mind giving me a hand, would you? I'm kinda running late for work." The person in the golf cart did not respond, and then I heard them getting out of the golf cart. The person came within the headlights of their own golf cart. The light was dim, so it was kind of hard to see, but he looked like a middle-aged man with no shirt on, so I could clearly see his beer gut. He also had hairy legs, and I could see that something was dangling under his massive stomach. Turns out, he was completely naked. That's something I could have lived my entire life without seeing. The man seemed to be holding something in his hands. I only caught a quick look at the object. All dick jokes aside, the thing that this guy was holding looked like a machete. The man didn't say a word as he started to slowly walk towards me. I quickly jumped back in my truck, started it up, and noped the fuck out of there. I didn't have time to grab my car jack, so I just left it behind. My truck was lopsided from the deflated tire, and it awkwardly accelerated forward. I could see my interior mirror that the headlights of the golf cart were close behind me. Despite my truck having a flat tire, it was still going a decent speed, and so was the golf cart that was tailing me. So in a split-second decision, I slammed the brakes of my Ranger, and not even a second later I heard and felt the golf cart smash into my rear end. I rolled down my window and shouted, "Fuck you, creep!" and sped off. I managed to get to work on time. Fucked up my room pretty bad though. I explained everything to the manager, and the cops were called. They searched the road but found no signs of the guy or his golf cart. But they did find my car jack, which was returned to me. Other than a few minor dents, the back of my truck didn't look bad at all. I'm shook it and tried her key. She too could not get her key in the lock. Annoyed, tired, and now just confused, she wrote it off as a problem for tomorrow, and the three of them hit their respective hay. One other person arrived home that night. Me. Though I arrived much earlier than those two, and was in bed by about midnight, I woke up close to 1 a.m. Still tired, all I could feel was anxiety, and I didn't know why. At first I tried to tell myself that I'd just gotten a bit too into the holiday spirit and had psyched myself out. But then I noticed a shadow. It was perfectly man-shaped and cast upon my window. I turned on my bedside lamp, blinked, and it was gone. It wasn't unusual, mind you, to see the shadows of people harmlessly walking through the alleyway and I told myself that's all there was to it. Then there was what happened after. I came home from school the next day. My parents were there. So was a locksmith, and so were the police. My parents were there because, well, that's where they lived. The locksmith was there because my mother had called him as the confusion over the broken lock persisted. The cops were there because the locksmith and my parents had called them when the locksmith proceeded to pull out the tip of a knife out of our lock. I was relieved to see that's where the knife tip had ended up, though, as they discovered 2 of our window screens had been slashed, one on our garage and one on my bedroom window.
Alrighty, for those of you who might recognize my last story, you know that I no longer have my dog. She's with a family friend on 6 acres and is super happy. I've moved to a place closer to the city to be with my family. Some necessary info. I live in a 2-story townhouse that also has a basement with a garage. To get into my basement, you have to go through the 2 storm doors of my garage. My in-laws are currently living in my basement, which is a single room with steps that lead to the main floor. My main floor is my kitchen, laundry room, half bathroom, and the living room. And then I have 2 bedrooms and a full bathroom upstairs. When coming up the stairs, my 2-year-old son's is the first bedroom. My 10-month-old daughter still sleeps in a crib in my bedroom. Now, my house is full with pretty unique decor. I also have a big screen TV, a PS4, and an Xbox 360. My in-laws also have a 360 and an even bigger flat screen. About 3 or 4 months after we moved in here, I was in my son's room with him when I noticed one of our neighbors leaving my garage door area. I didn't see if she actually came out of it or not, but she was near it and walking away with a trash bag. I figured that she'd just gotten confused because she looked older and all of the houses look the exact same in the back and have no numbers back there. So I just...
That golf cart had it 10 times worse. He had to be going full speed when he crashed into me, and I'm surprised he was able to drive it away after that. I've come to the conclusion that this weirdo was on a serious meth high, because that area has that kind of reputation. I no longer own that truck or work at that site anymore. So, creepy bare-ass overweight machete-wielding psychopath, for the love of God, put on some fucking pants.
When I was 18, I worked at a local coffee shop in my hometown, and I often worked there picking up shifts and closing 6 nights a week. I had lots of regulars and lots of randoms, but other than maybe a few awkward orders, I never really had a problem with the customer being inappropriate or out of hand. This night was already really stressful for me because it was Halloween, and I was a little bummed to be closing when my friends were out and about. I had some plans to go with friends to a house that my friends had rented right down the street after work, with some pastries and Red Bull, so I didn't really mind too much. It was about 9:45, and I was already ready to close right at 10. It had been dead since about 8, and all I had to do was a final register count. Everything was clean, and I was reading a book to pass time, trying not to watch the clock. Our counter, by the way, is like a bar counter. Long, with the register near the door at the closed end, and with one far end open for us to go in and out of, right near the door to our back room. A man walked in the front door, who looked to be about his mid-20s. He was black and had on a big hoodie, and was wearing sweatpants that sagged down, so I could see the waistbands of 2 different pairs of gym shorts underneath. I'm a young white female, but I have no fear of people and I'm not racist, so I didn't bat an eyelash when he walked in with one hand in his hoodie pocket, and the other in the pocket of one of the pairs of gym shorts. Men of all races wear clothes like that and carry themselves that way, at least where I live, so with no concern, I greeted him and asked him how he was, and what he was thinking of ordering. He took his time to respond, but wasn't looking at the menu or at our chalkboard with seasonal drink offers. He was looking at the front door. He took about a minute, then turned to me and asked my name. I often had both male and female customers ask this, so I just told him, and then asked again when he was looking to order. He began to ask me more questions about me and my job. He asked if I liked it. I responded, thinking maybe he wanted a job application, and gave him a very short version of how I felt. It was almost 9:50 at this time, and I kept checking my phone, thinking that I just wanted to make his drink so I could clean up again and meet my friends. He nodded, saying he thought I liked my job, which I thought was strange, but again, I didn't think about it. I agreed again. He then started to ask about the shifts I worked. I figured he had sympathy that it was Halloween, and I gave him a vague answer. He then asked why I didn't work on Thursdays. My heart jumped. I didn't see that one coming from a mile away. I struggled to say how I just needed to calm down, and that he was just really excited to meet me. He still had one hand down near his dick and began to fondle himself, holding the gun with the other hand, and about 3 feet away from the opening in the bar. I asked him again to just leave, and when he didn't move, I asked him what I did to him and why this was happening. He began to speak, saying that I was very pretty. He was continuing to talk when all of a sudden, my friend walked in the door with his friends in tow. There were 5 guys all together, and all in a metal band together, so they were a pretty distinct group of guys. The man had put his gun in his hoodie pocket so quickly that only 2 of my friends noticed it. He ran for the door, pushing past my friends, and disappeared into the night. I threw up as soon as he was gone, and 2 of my friends ran out after him, but didn't gain on him enough and didn't see where he went to. I quit my job the next day and called the police. There was never any follow-up, and I still wonder what the fuck did or didn't happen to me that night.
Halloween is my favorite holiday. Is, not was. Despite the events that unfolded one crisp Hallows Eve when I was about 16. At the time, I lived with my parents, younger brother, older stepbrother, and cousin in a big but old house that sat in a cul-de-sac close to Main Street. Behind it ran an alleyway flanked by apartments, and it had a huge yard that my basement bedroom looked out on. We lived in a small town. Crime seemed minimal in that area, and I'd made my way out that Halloween night to make the most of the best day of the year. It wasn't just what happened that night, though. It was, of course, what came after, and one small incident that came before. A few days before Halloween, my stepbrother and cousins arrived home to discover a pickup truck full of dudes taking photos of our house. Weird, but when we approached the men, they seemed friendly and complimented our Halloween setup. It was pretty great, that is true. The men sped off without incident and were quickly forgotten. My stepbrother and cousin re-entered the story Halloween night, the big event itself, at about 3 a.m. Both had been out drinking with their friends, and as such, both had left their respective vehicles and braved the icy walk home on their own. My cousin arrived home first, but he couldn't seem to get his key in the lock, so just sat on the porch bench and waited for my stepbrother to show up. He did about a half hour later. After having a bit of a laugh at my cousin for being an uncoordinated goober, he went to unlock the door himself, and no luck. So they bit the bullet and called my mom, waking her up to let them in. She was of course unimpressed to be opening the door for a pair of drunk idiots at this time of night, and didn't buy their story about the wonky lock. They insisted though, and to shut them up she finally relented
to respond, and he continued, and asked if Sunday mornings were better than Wednesday nights. At this point, I broke into nervous laughter and smiles, asking him if he was looking to work for the coffee shop, and that we needed the help. He'd stopped smiling at this point, and his hand in the hoodie pocket made an abrupt move to the very inside pair of gym shorts, basically so that he would be grabbing himself. He didn't quite reach in all the way, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I asked him to order or leave, as the end of our business day was almost there, and that I needed to clean and lock up. At this point, I grabbed my cell phone and kept it in my hand, thinking, how can I dial 911 and not have him begin to molest himself in front of me, or whatever he planned on doing? He began to sort of lean on the counter and ask me questions. He asked me where I lived, did I have a boyfriend, what were my plans for that night. I was trying hard not to cry, and tried my best to lie through more vague answers, hoping he would just go away if I didn't freak out. He began to move away from the register at this point, still leaning on the counter, hands in his pants, towards the open end of the bar. I began to back far towards the front door as possible, but that end had no opening, and was so high. I couldn't jump it without considerable effort, and climbing over an espresso machine. The only other exit I could think of was our narrow drive-through window. Clutching my phone, I asked him what he wanted. For some reason, he stopped. He stood up and looked toward the front door, then turned to look at the clock behind him. I took the chance to start running a text message to my friend, saying, if I'm not at your place in 10 minutes, call the police. He caught me sending the text and asked me who I was texting. I told him it was my boyfriend, and his face became something that I will never forget. His eyes blazed, and he was still as a stone. He calmly told me to throw my cell phone across the floor, specifically telling me to try and throw it to the drive-thru. I had to really toss it, about 9 feet away. Afterwards, he began to scream, making his way again down the counter. He asked me how I could have a boyfriend, when he had been watching me at work for the last 2 months as often as possible, and had never seen a man drop me off or pick me up at work. He pointed to the side of the building that I parked on, and said he knew I parked my blue Toyota there earlier, and not to lie to him. I asked him to leave, beginning to cry. He began to describe my work shifts to a T. When I came in, when I left, how I smoked across the street on break. He told me that he knew that I only drank the Diet Coke that we sold, and that I always cranked up my music when I started my car. At that point, he pulled a small gun out of the gym shorts and waved it around as he said I was stupid to lie to him and that he knew it all. He was going between enraged and laughing, as if he couldn't believe that I didn't want to talk to him, or that it was funny that I was scared. I offered him all the money in the register, and he just laughed again, like hysterically, and then again went still. He said, and I'll never forget this moment, I'm not here for any money, Marina. I'm not here for a job. I think you know what I'm here for. I'm sobbing now, and it made him either frustrated or sympathetic, and he began to say